8:05 a.m. Silvercrest Motors. A $500,000 Rolls-Royce Phantom sits motionless, its hood open like a wounded metallic beast. 3 luxury garages have already failed to revive it. Billionaire Eleanor Whitmore stands nearby, radiating cold desperation. Her legacy-defining contract signing is just 20 hours away. In the shadowed corner, struggling single dad Tom Bennett quietly wipes grease from his calloused hands. "Don't waste our time, temp," a manager sneers. But amidst the silence, Tom hears it. A tiny, almost imperceptible rattle deep within the engine. He steps into the light. "Give me 20 minutes. Eleanor nods. These 20 minutes will rewrite 2 lives forever. Tom Bennett didn't belong in a place like Silvercrest. This was a cathedral of chrome and leather, a place where the air smelled of expensive espresso and premium wax. Tom, however, smelled of old diesel and hard labor. He lived in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of the industrial district with his 9-year-old daughter, Sophie. Since his wife, Sarah, had passed away 4 years ago, Tom's life had narrowed down to a single goal: survival for Sophie. Every morning, before the sun dared to touch the city skyline, Tom was already up. He would prepare a simple breakfast for Sophie, oatmeal and a bit of fruit, and kiss her forehead before dropping her at the neighbor's. His life was a series of difficult shifts. He took the night calls, the heavy lifting, and the engine rebuilds that younger, cleaner mechanics refused to touch. At Silvercrest, despite his immense skill, he was a ghost, a daily contractor. No title, no health insurance, no name on his locker, just the temp. Tom had once been the golden boy of his engineering university. He studied precision engineering with a focus on fluid dynamics. He was the student who could solve a differential equation in his head before the professor finished writing it on the board. But then the world happened. His father fell ill. Then Sarah got sick. The tuition money went to hospital bills. The dreams of designing the next generation of aerospace engines were buried under the reality of changing oil on SUVs. But Tom kept his gift. He called it a curse because it wouldn't let him rest. He didn't trust the glowing diagnostic screens that the other techs worshipped. To Tom, a computer was just a translator, and often a bad one. He listened to the metal. He felt the micro vibrations in the steering column. The younger mechanics, boys with expensive degrees and spotless uniforms, called him old school. They mocked him behind his back for carrying a vintage medical stethoscope in his toolbox instead of a high-end tablet. "The machine talks to you if you know how to shut up and listen," Tom would tell them. They would just laugh and walk away, adjusting their wireless earbuds. Today, the garage was in a state of high-alert panic. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, a masterpiece of British engineering worth nearly $500,000, sat like a dead weight on the pristine floor. It was Eleanor Whitmore's car. Eleanor was the CEO of Whitmore Global, a woman who moved markets with a single text message. She was 44, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Tom's annual salary. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were sharp, but deep circles under them betrayed her lack of sleep. This car was vital. She had a merger signing in 24 hours, a deal that would define her career. But more than that, this specific Phantom was the last vehicle her father had ever ridden in. It wasn't just metal to her. It was a sanctuary. Every scratch on the leather, every hum of the engine was a whisper from a man who was no longer there to guide her. 3 of the city's most prestigious garages had already looked at it. They had towed it across 3 counties. They had replaced the fuel injectors, the spark plugs, the primary ECU, and the entire high-pressure fuel rail. Over $50,000 in guesswork had been billed to her. The car would start, run for 10 minutes, and then die with a sickening, rattling cough. No codes, no warnings. Just silence. Tom watched from the shadows of the back bay as the Silvercrest lead technician, a man named Marcus, tried to start the engine. Cough, sputter, silence. "It's the wiring harness," Marcus declared, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need to pull the engine. It'll take a week." Eleanor's face went pale. "I don't have a week. I don't have an hour." Tom noticed something. He had been watching the car for the last 20 minutes. He noticed the sound only changed, a micro shift in frequency, exactly when the cooling fans kicked on. It wasn't the harness, it was a physical interference. He could feel the panic in the air, but his own mind was cold, calculating. He visualized the engine as a living, breathing organism whose breath was being choked by its own rib cage. He took a deep breath. He knew his place. He was supposed to stay in the back. But he thought of Sophie's tuition bill sitting on his kitchen table. He thought of the eviction notice he had hidden under a pile of mail. He thought of the look in Eleanor's eyes, the look of someone who was about to lose something they couldn't replace. He stepped forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor. "I can fix it," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I won't need to pull the engine. I won't need any new parts at all." Marcus laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Tom, get back to the oil bay. Don't embarrass us in front of Mrs. Whitmore." But Eleanor had turned. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto Tom's. She saw the grease-stained hands, but she also saw the calm, steady gaze of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at. There was a quiet dignity in his posture that she hadn't seen in any of the specialists she had paid thousands to. "You think you see something these experts missed?" she asked. "I don't see it, ma'am," Tom said. "I hear it. It's a thermal expansion issue. Very rare, but very simple once you find the source." The manager hurried over, face red. "Mrs. Whitmore, he's just a temp. He's not certified for this chassis." Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him instantly. She looked at the clock on the wall. Then she looked back at Tom. "You have 20 minutes. If you break it further, you're fired. If you fix it, well, let's just start with the 20 minutes." The atmosphere in the garage became suffocatingly tense. The other mechanics stopped working, leaning against their benches to watch the old-school temp fail on the biggest stage imaginable. The air seemed to thick with judgment and the smell of ozone from the diagnostic machines. Tom didn't reach for a diagnostic tablet. He didn't even plug in the OBD2 scanner. Instead, he asked Marcus to start the engine one more time. "Are you deaf?" Marcus sneered. "I told you it'll just die again. You're just wasting everyone's time, Bennett." "Start it," Eleanor commanded. Her voice was like a whip crack. The engine hummed to life. Tom didn't stand at the front. He walked to the side near the firewall. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his stethoscope. He placed the bell against the structural frame of the car. Not the engine block, but the frame. He stood there perfectly still, his eyes closed. He was visualizing the flow of heat. In his mind, he saw the coolant channels, the oil galleries, and the structural mounts as a complex map of expanding and contracting metal. "Luxury cars aren't fixed with ears, Bennett," a tech whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't a 1995 Ford. You can't just listen to $500,000 of precision software." Tom ignored the noise. He was focused on the vibration. Thump, 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 thump. It was the heartbeat of the machine. He heard the fans kick on. He heard the secondary water pump engage. And then he heard it. A tiny, high-pitched ping. It was so faint that it was below the threshold of human hearing without amplification. It sounded like a fingernail clicking against a glass. To Tom, it was a scream. "I need the service history," Tom said, opening his eyes. "Specifically the logs from 18 months ago. Look for anything related to the mounting brackets." The manager hesitated, looking at Marcus for guidance, but Eleanor nodded. They brought up the digital records on the big screen. Tom scrolled through hundreds of lines of code and maintenance. There it was, July 14th. Cooling system bracket replacement. "That bracket," Tom pointed, "it was replaced with the updated revision B part. It's made of a high-tensile alloy. It was supposed to be an upgrade." "So?" Marcus challenged. "It's a better part. It's stronger. It's factory certified. You think you know better than the Rolls-Royce engineering team? It's stronger, but it has a different coefficient of thermal expansion," Tom said, his voice gaining confidence. He could see the physics in his head now, as clear as day. When the engine hits 60 degrees, the engine block expands by 3 microns. But that bracket? It expands by 7 microns because of the new alloy. It's mounted too close to the secondary fuel return line. As it heats up, it doesn't just hold the line, it pinches it. It acts like a slow-motion pair of pliers, choking the car to death. Tree. The room went silent. The theory was technically sound, but practically unheard of. It was the kind of thing you only learned by spending decades at a workbench, not by reading a manual. That's impossible, Marcus stuttered. The tolerances on a Rolls-Royce are perfect, Tom finished, which is why a 4-micron error is enough to kill the fuel pressure. The computer doesn't see a leak or a failure, so it doesn't throw a code. It just sees the pressure drop and shuts down the injectors to save the engine. It's doing exactly what it was programmed to do, but for the wrong reason. Tom grabbed a small wrench. I need to remove the primary heat shield. That's a 4-hour job, the manager yelled. You have to drain the primary reservoir and disconnect the steering column. I don't need to remove it completely, Tom said, already sliding under the car with a speed that surprised them. He was a man possessed. I just need to clear the access port. I can reach it if I go in from the side. Eleanor watched, mesmerized. She saw a man who moved with the grace of a surgeon. He wasn't guessing. He was performing. She checked her watch. 10 minutes left. The silence in the garage was broken only by the clink of metal against metal and Tom's steady breathing. Under the car, the heat was intense. The engine was still hot from the previous attempts, radiating a brutal warmth that soaked into Tom's skin. He felt the burn on his forearms, but he didn't flinch. He reached into the tightest gap between the firewall and the transmission bell housing. His fingers, calloused and scarred from 1,000 other battles with machines, found the bracket. It was exactly as he suspected. The metal was burning hot, and the bracket was visibly pressing against the braided fuel line, creating a deep indentation. I need a 3mm rubber gasket, Tom shouted from under the car. We don't have rubber gaskets for a Phantom fuel system, the parts manager yelled back. Everything is O-ring sealed. We use specialized synthetic compounds. Tom slid out from under the car, sweat pouring down his face, leaving streaks through the grease. He went to his own beat-up red toolbox, the only thing he truly owned. He pulled out a small tray of miscellaneous hardware he had collected over 20 years. He found a tiny reinforced rubber washer, a part that cost maybe $3 at a hardware store. This will do it, he said. You're putting a generic washer on a $500,000 car? Marcus asked, horrified. You'll be sued into the ground. You're desecrating a work of art. Eleanor stepped forward. She looked at the tiny piece of rubber in Tom's hand. Then she looked at Tom. She saw the desperation in his eyes, not for himself, but for the task. She saw a man who cared more about the machine than the manual. Do it, she said. Tom went back in. The clock was ticking. 18 minutes. 19 minutes. The manager was counting down under his breath. Tom loosened the bolt just enough to slide the gasket in, creating a thermal barrier and a physical gap of just a few millimeters. He tightened it, not with a torque wrench, but by feel. He knew the tension. He knew the metal's limit. He felt the threads catch and hold. He slid out, his shirt ruined, his face covered in a mix of grease and sweat. He looked like he had been to war. Start it, he said, breathing hard. The freeze moment. This was the point where time seemed to stretch into infinity. The dust motes in the air seemed to hang perfectly still in the shafts of sunlight. Marcus stepped into the driver's seat. He looked at the dashboard, then at Tom, then at Eleanor. His hand hovered over the button, trembling slightly. He pressed the start button. The starter motor whirred for a fraction of a second, a sound so crisp it felt like a bell. And then, the engine caught, but it didn't sound like it had before. There was no vibration. There was no idle. It was as if the car had simply transformed into a solid block of silk. The needle on the tachometer sat perfectly still at 700 RPM. On the dashboard, a small bottle of sparkling water sat in the cup holder. The surface of the water was as smooth as glass. Not a single ripple, not even a shimmer. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. The cooling fans kicked on with a soft whoosh. Usually this was the moment the car would die, the moment the dream would end. The fans whirred. The engine temperature climbed to 65 degrees, 70 degrees. The heat was building. The bracket was expanding. But this time, there was a gap. This time, the fuel could flow. The engine didn't stumble. It didn't cough. It just continued its silent, perfect song. The diagnostic screen on the wall, the one that had been showing system nominal while the car was dying, now showed something different. The fuel pressure line was a perfectly straight, unwavering green stroke. No dips, no spikes, just perfection. "He did it," a junior tech whispered. "He actually did it with a piece of junk from his toolbox." The manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor tiles. Marcus sat in the car, staring at the dash in disbelief. He had spent 3 days on this car. He had used $10,000 worth of diagnostic equipment, and a man with a stethoscope and a $3 washer had fixed it in 20 minutes. Eleanor Whitmore walked toward the car. She moved slowly, as if she were afraid she might wake it from a dream. She placed her hand on the hood. She felt the warmth, but no tremor. It was the calmest the car had felt since her father died. She turned to Tom. He was standing by his toolbox, wiping his hands with a rag that was already too dirty to do much good. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped from the adrenaline crash. But there was a quiet spark of pride in his eyes. "It's gone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The rattle, the instability. It feels like it did when my father first bought it, like it's finally at peace." "It's a good car, ma'am," Tom said simply. "It just needed someone to listen to it instead of just staring at it." Eleanor walked closer to him, ignoring the grease and the smell of fuel that clung to him. "Why did you know? I sent this car to the best shops in the country. I flew in engineers from London who helped build the thing. They told me the car was haunted. They told me it was a ghost in the software that could never be found." Tom leaned against his toolbox. "The problem with experts today, ma'am, is that they trust the screen more than the machine. They think that if the computer doesn't see a problem, the problem doesn't exist. But computers only know what they're programmed to know. Metal? Metal has its own laws. It has physics. It has memory. It reacts to the world in ways a microchip can't understand." He took a breath, thinking of his own journey. "I spent 10 years in the industrial pits, working on massive steam turbines that were built before I was born. Those machines don't have sensors. They don't have ECUs. If they're sick, they tell you with a sound or a vibration. You have to learn their language or they'll kill you. I had to drop out of my engineering PhD when my daughter was born and my wife got sick. Life got heavy, but I never stopped learning the language of machines. I just traded a laboratory for a grease pit." Eleanor stayed silent for a long time. She looked around the garage. She saw the expensive equipment, the clean uniforms, and the terrified manager who was already trying to formulate an excuse. Then she looked at Tom. She saw the immense value of experience that had been sidelined because it didn't have the right title or certification. She saw a man who had been discarded by a system that valued polish over substance. She thought about her own company. How many Toms had she overlooked in her boardrooms? How much true talent had she ignored because it didn't come in a tailored suit or with a fancy degree? "What's your daughter's name?" she asked. "Sophie," Tom said, his face softening at the mention of her. The lines of stress around his eyes seemed to fade for a moment. "And what does Sophie want to be?" "A scientist," Tom smiled. "She wants to build things that help people. She spends her evenings drawing blueprints for clean engines. But we're taking it one day at a time. Education is expensive, and my contract here was up on Friday." Eleanor looked at the Rolls-Royce. "You saved this car, Tom, but you also saved something else. You saved my trust in the fact that there are still people who care about doing things right. People who don't just follow a manual, but who understand the soul of their work." She turned to the manager. Her voice was no longer soft. It was the voice of a billionaire CEO who had just made a major acquisition. "Who is in charge of your contracting?" she asked. I am Mrs. Whitmore," the manager stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Effective immediately," Eleanor said. "Tom Bennett is no longer a contractor at Silvercrest Motors because as of 5 minutes ago, I am buying this garage. I'm buying the lease, the equipment, and the debt. And Tom is my new director of technical operations for the entire region." The room collectively gasped. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the sound of Marcus accidentally hitting the horn in his shock. I don't know what to say, Tom whispered. He felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Don't say anything, Eleanor said, reaching into her bag. You have 24 hours to get this place in order. I want the dead weight cleared out and the real talent promoted. I have a contract to sign tomorrow, and I'm going to be driven there in this car. And Tom, make sure you're the one holding the keys when I leave. You've earned the right to be the gatekeeper here. The next morning was different. Tom didn't wake up in a panic. He didn't have to count his change to see if he could afford a mid-morning coffee. Eleanor had sent a car for him, not a Rolls-Royce, but a high-end SUV. Inside was a folder. It wasn't just a contract, it was a future. She had kept her word. She didn't just give him a job, she gave him a legacy. First, a full-ride scholarship trust for Sophie. It covered her primary school, her high school, and any university in the world she chose to attend. It included housing, books, and a stipend. Sophie would never have to drop out to work a night shift. Second, a salary that Tom couldn't even process. It was more in a month than he used to make in 2 years. But more importantly, the hours were flexible. He was the boss. If he needed to pick Sophie up from school at 3 p.m., he did. Third, Tom was given a carte blanche to redesign the Silvercrest training program. He turned the polished showroom into a place of learning. He hired the old-timers, the guys with the grease under their nails and the wisdom in their heads. He created a new standard, the human element. A week later, the garage held a small reopening ceremony. The techs were now dressed in practical, durable gear. The diagnostic tablets were still there, but every station now had a stethoscope and a vibration sensor. Sophie came to the garage that afternoon. She was wearing a tiny pair of overalls with Bennett stitched on the pocket. She walked around the Rolls-Royce, which was parked in a place of honor. "Is this the car that changed everything, Daddy?" she asked, touching the polished fender. Tom knelt down. He looked at his daughter, her bright eyes, her unlimited potential. He felt a weight lift off his chest that he had been carrying for nearly a decade. "No, Peanut," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the one who changed everything. The car was just a way to get us home." Worried, he hugged her tight, and for the first time in 4 years, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like he was finally standing on solid ground. 1 year later, the Silvercrest name had become legendary. People didn't just come there for repairs, they came for the Bennett assessment. Tom had saved his customers millions in unnecessary part replacements. He had proven that a $3 fix is better than a $30,000 replacement if it's the right fix. Tom still lived in a modest house. He bought a better one, closer to Sophie's new school, but it wasn't a mansion. He didn't need a mansion. He needed a garden where Sophie could play and a garage where he could work on his own projects. Eleanor Whitmore stayed in touch. She wasn't just a client anymore. She was a friend. She would stop by the garage not because her Phantom was broken, it still ran like a dream, but to have a cup of coffee and talk about the world. She told Tom that his listen first philosophy had changed how she ran her global company. She stopped looking at spreadsheets and started looking at the people behind them. Tom started a night class for underprivileged youth. He taught them that their hands were their most valuable tools. He told them his story about the 20 minutes that changed his life. On his office shelf in a small velvet-lined box sat that original $3 rubber gasket. It was a reminder that no matter how complex the world becomes, the truth is usually simple. Every morning, Tom still drops Sophie off at school. He still kisses her forehead. He still tells her to listen to the world. And as he drives back to the garage, the engine hums a silent, perfect tune, a tune that only he can truly hear. Because in the end, life isn't about the machine you drive. It's about the soul you keep while you're driving it. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Chip Healing Stories. Your support helps us find more heroes in the shadows.